So about Fusion Burst Aemeath, let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, Aemeath is a very strong character at the minute. Her Tomb Break mode is absolutely killing it in the meta right now, and I think everybody can agree that Aemeath is an absolutely busted DPS. Super fun, super awesome, all of that is very snazzy. However, she has two modes, a Tomb Break mode and a negative status mode, which features Fusion Burst. Very interesting, we don't have a single Fusion Burst-centric character in the game right now, or at least no Fusion Burst-centric main DPS. So, very interesting indeed. However, we don't actually have a proper second slot teammate for Fusion Burst at the minute. Now, I honestly was not that surprised that this mode ended up being really bad, and I was not surprised that this did not end up being the character that saved Chisa, because Chisa is a third slot teammate, and she is never going to be the character that makes or breaks a negative status team. She definitely might be balanced around the future ones, but she's never going to be the character that makes a certain negative status outright viable. Chisa's good for negative status teams, and she's certainly the most viable negative status character, but she is far from a character that is able to single-handedly make a respective status work on its own without a good second slot teammate. Perhaps this happens in the future, but at least as of now, the closest we have to that sort of thing happening would be Cardathea, who can at the very least operate without Shakona if you do have a Chisa in her team. But in any case, I don't think that she is the grand savior of any particular negative status. So we're in a position where, while you can play Fusion Burst Aemeath, with a TOA shield indeed being good enough to at least clear with it, it is far from her most optimal way to be played. Yes, it's cool that it exists, and it's cool for Chisa fans that really want to use her, but at least as of now, it is far from good. Now, when is it going to be good? I think the answer is pretty straightforward here. When we eventually get a good Fusion second slot teammate. I think Kuro did something pretty interesting with Aemeath, because I feel like Kuro themselves finally understands that negative statuses are just so fundamentally flawed. The only way that they can really make a negative status character feel truly free-to-play friendly is if they give them a dedicated 4-star teammate. It's what makes Phoebe more accessible, because you can just use Spectra Rover instead, and that is going to work very effectively for her. You can use Shakona, of course, that's going to be better and more comfortable, but you can use Spectra Rover and TOA and it's going to be awesome. It's a bit clunky in Whimpering Wastes and basically just doesn't really work there. Phoebe is basically exclusively a TOA character if you don't have Shakona, but even so, the point stands that she is the only negative status character that has a budget teammate option in that regard, and that is what made her so free-to-play friendly on release. But I feel like at this point, everybody has accepted that Kuro Games is just never really going to focus on budget teammates or budget options that much, and if a character ends up being able to use one of the older 4-stars, that more often than not is just a nice coincidence or a nice bonus. They're probably never going to make another Mortefi or Sanhua. So, with this in mind, negative statuses are just inherently very costly, and I think because of that, Kuro Games realized, alright, these characters are just not going to be worth it for people in the long run if they only have access to their negative status team. Now, I'm not sure if future negative status characters are going to be handled in a similar way to Aemeath. After all, Aemeath is a very big release, so giving her two separate teams is not exactly something far-fetched for a character like her, but I will say I find it quite interesting that the solution that Kuro chose was simply allowing the character to not interact with the negative status part of their kit whatsoever and still be an extremely strong unit. So ultimately, I do think that in the future, she will probably get a good Fusion Burst team, and because Aemeath is a main push unit, it's not unlikely that she's going to get a complete full second team. They're rerunning Chisa alongside Aemeath for a reason. Kuro Games, generally speaking, when they can be strategic with their reruns, they will be strategic with their reruns. So it's pretty obvious why they're putting Chisa on banners, even though she released literally over a patch ago. Kuro Games prioritizes rerunning characters based on when they're relevant, as opposed to when it's just due for their rerun. So I think that Chisa rerunning now does make sense, because she does have that Fusion Burst part of her kit. That does make sense. But even so, that character on her own isn't really able to save Aemeath's Fusion Burst mode, so it's pretty clear that we're waiting for some kind of second slot teammate for her. Now, in an ideal world, we would have some kind of budget option that would be able to play Fusion Burst Aemeath, and another thing is that would actually solve one of Aemeath's issues. She has a lot of good team options. a lot of good limited 5-star team options, and if you pull for Lupa, or if you have one of her Toon Break teammates, then you're pretty easily able to form a team with her. But if you don't have any of the good premium 5-star teammates for her, then you're going to have to use Jian Xin, who is just not a very good character. And at S2, she does get a little bit smoother to play, but even so, her Concerto energy generation is still just really slow, and you're only playing her for her liberation damage bonus that she provides on outro. So, with that in mind, giving her a budget option for her Fusion Burst team would actually be really nice, because it would then provide an actual 4-star, or at the very least accessible teammate for Aemeath mains. And when I say accessible but not a 4-star, I'm mostly referring to Rover there, but either way, you get the point. So it's pretty obvious when Fusion Burst is going to get good. As for whether Chisa is going to be required for it or not, I do think that she's definitely going to be a good part of a team, and that is finally when Chisa mains are going to get their absolution. No, wait, that's a Phoebe reference. And finally be able to play their character to the fullest. But another question is Fusion Burst actually going to be relevant? Because think about it like this. Toon Break is just really strong on Aemeath right now, and I feel like the main justification for pulling a secondary team for Aemeath is simply going to be so that you can have a reason to free up your double Toon Break core. Now, I will say that is a valuable justification to exist. The double Toon Break core is literally the strongest team core in the game right now, and it can fit onto the end of basically any DPSing team. So simply freeing up that team core does serve as a valuable purpose to exist in of itself. And if that is the core reason for the negative status team for Aemeath existing, then you know what? I suppose that would be acceptable, and whether that's worth it for a certain player or not is just going to entirely depend on whether they want to free up their double Toon Break core or not, and that's going to be more valuable or less valuable depending on what specific supports you have, and pulling another dedicated team for Aemeath in particular is not a bad idea at all when you consider that she is just so dominant in the meta right now. Yes, TOA shield is pretty strong for her, but I believe that even whenever that shield leaves, Aemeath is still going to be definitively the best DPS in the game for the foreseeable future, because her damage is simply just that high. She is absolutely ridiculous in TOA. I also think Chisa fans have just been waiting for their character to get a little bit better for a while now, because that character is pretty popular, and I do think that it's just another Cantarella situation where unfortunately, Chisa simply released ahead of her time, and one thing I do want to point out as consolation to Chisa fans, she released in 2.8. Her having low pull value in 3.1 is not really a shocker when that character did not come out that long ago. It is not really that surprising that in the span of like one patch, the unit's pull value has barely shifted in her favor. And another thing that I should mention, Cantarella came out in 2.2. For 2.3 and 2.4, she didn't really have much meta value. She finally got her respective unit in 2.5. So that didn't take long, but it still took Cantarella 3 patches to gain an actual substantial use case and be saved in the meta. Now in Chisa's case, she's been out for 2 patches, so I do think that it's probably not going to be that long until Chisa finally gets a reason to be used. And I think the fact that Aemeath has a negative status aspect to your kit proves that Kuro Games is not done with negative status yet. So I wouldn't necessarily feel bad if you invested into that character because she will get her time to shine soon. It's just unfortunately, they released her at a time where she didn't really have to be released, and she was a very small upscale to Cardothea teams if you had Chisa's signature weapon, and she can be played in negative status teams in general, but isn't necessarily some powerful unit in any one of them. Though, all around, I think Fusion Burst does have potential on Aemeath, simply because this unit is inherently strong. Yes, Fusion Burst is just not going to be as good as her Toon Break teams. That is the unfortunate reality of the situation. But I think it's going to justify its existence soon. And as for when it's going to stop sucking, I honestly don't think that's in too long from now. Kuro Games doesn't usually leave things like this unresolved for too long. Consider the start of Renacita. We got Spectra Rover in 2.0, then Phoebe in 2.1, and then eventually Zani in 2.3. They tend to introduce these things early, leave some crumbs for what might happen in the future, and then boom, we get that thing that we were all expecting. So I think this isn't necessarily something that's super unpredictable. I do think that Fusion Burst is probably going to be good on her. If anything, it's just because it's Aemeath and that character is really, really strong right now. Like, do not underestimate her strength. She is definitively the best DPS in the game right now. So I feel like simply being a unit that's that strong and having an alternative team option to free up some of her teammates is a fair enough reason for Fusion Burst to be a thing that exists. So it can justify its existence simply because Aemeath is just that strong, and I don't necessarily think it's going to suck for much longer. The reason I really emphasize that it's just not good right now is because I don't want anybody to be baited into thinking, oh my goodness, I need to get Chisa right now, or I need to worry about this right now. You really don't, because as of its current state, Fusion Burst Aemeath is just not good. You want to use Toon Break instead. It is just definitively the better team no matter what way you look at it. But I do think that Fusion Burst's time will probably come soon, because Kuro Games would not add this aspect to your kit if they did not intend to build upon it in the future. And another thing that I find quite amusing about this is that, oh my goodness, the flow of fusion units is just never going to end, is it? We're just always going to be trapped in fusion hell, aren't we? But you know what? It's Aemeath, so I can live with it. I like the character a lot. Hopefully this video is able to tell you when Fusion Burst will stop sucking, and why it might actually be pretty decent. This has been Juice, signing out, and you know what? It's gonna be worthwhile no matter what, because it's Aemeath, and Aemeath is peak.